if the other options were going to be right for me. So they phase like aesthetics and honestly the zone are really something I really like a lot in the game. So
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
at the time in the beta it was like really powerful, but now not as good, but it's still like really fun and I feel like it's like really engaging. So anyway, here, first pack here, we have these fungi stormers. I marked this one with a skull. This thing is going to do this fungi storm. It's a very high amount of AoE damage, and the only way to stop it is actually with a stun. So yeah, DK, a couple of stun options, but that's something to keep in mind, especially if you're tanking. If nobody else is interrupting it, it's going to do a lot of damage to the group. And then I always open with this big guy here. It is bolstering, so maybe it's not super advisable, but that big guy just has one thing that needs to be interrupted. And if he doesn't get interrupted, he will, like it will spawn some ads. So then for the route I've been doing, I run through the middle here. This is mostly because they changed the route I wanted to use originally. Very low risk here. You can just run through on both sides. There's not much that can get
Yep.
aggroed, although we did aggro
Someone
something.
got it.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine because it's not prideful, but that would be like a big mistake on prideful because you want to control where the route hits those 20% splits. But again, it's another pack. We have this one mob that we have seen as well, but I didn't explain. It was the Fungal Mancer. It's going to do this cast. There it is. There. It's called Wonder Grow. If it gets off, it puts this giant damage done buff on everything near it, and that is
Mhm.
another really high priority. But that's at least just fully interruptible. It doesn't actually need to be stunned or anything. So the Fungal Stormer is the one that you need to stun, and the Fungal Mancer is just a straight up interrupt.
Okay.
And this Plague Boar that we're fighting right now, it's actually aggroed from the right. That's just typically part of my route. I feel like somebody's going to aggro one of these because they're kind of running around. And it
Mhm.
gives us the perfect 20% split after this area here. But this is typically where I would get that here. We pulled this pack with that one Plague Boar that we aggroed anyway. And this is actually one of the more dangerous packs if you chose to use this route. It's 4 mobs. Again, we have the Fungi Storm, which I stun, and the Wonder Grow, which I interrupt. But then that extra mob there, it's doing extra nature damage on top of this mechanic here. This mushroom just spawns one of these mobs. Probably this harvester spawns this giant mushroom. Of course, if you're in that and it explodes, you're going to take a ton of damage. But usually on a fortified week, this is probably the hardest pack in the game, or in the dungeon for DK. And if you're not ready for it, especially because it's pretty early in the dungeon, people aren't really, I feel like maybe not ready for what's coming this quickly into it's only the third pull of the dungeon.
Okay.
Now up here, there's this big kind of field of these slimes. I would say typically on, if you're comfortable surviving a lot, then you can pull as much as you want. But certainly this week with bolstering, you definitely don't want to do that. Like I would consider pulling every single one here if I could. But bolstering obviously is going to make that really bad. And more so as you see on the sides here, these plague belchers. If somebody
Mhm.
accidentally backpedals into that thing while you're fighting 7 or 8 of those with bolstering, you are going to wipe. Like there's no way this mob can get bolstered 7 times and you will live it. So just
Yeah.
some pug mentality to keep in mind. Like ideal play won't ever have that happen, but of course when you're dealing with no voice communication stuff, it's tough. People accidentally make mistakes all the time like that. But otherwise, this guy just does a little frontal, and these ads that are coming to him, if they get to him, they buff him. So
Do you typically just want to avoid the ads, or do you want people to kill the ads?
yeah, ideally you would just CC them. You did well with the Chains of Ice there. Actually, that's a really nice play. But like in a key like this, you probably don't even have to do that. Like it dies so quick. But once you're getting higher progression, like you're struggling with fortified trash and stuff, you're probably going to need either concerted effort on those ads, either kill them or like have more rotational stuns and slows on them, or just kite the mob as far as you can, to make sure they don't hit them. I've seen both work. It's going to get a lot harder the higher up you go.
Okay.
And that
And
typically,
same for this boss. Do you want to do you like the droop to kill the ads or kite him? So I've seen it
yeah.
both ways. Yeah.
So it's going to depend a lot on your damage profile and what week you're doing. If you're sure that you can kill it very, very quickly, i.e. before a second big slime spawns, then you should not deal with the ads at all. Just 1 CC. Unfortunately, as DK, we don't have a good option. But the group usually has druids and stuff, so they can do it. So 1 CC and then burn the boss. But on a tyrannical week, you might want to kill 1 set of ads, maybe even 2 sets, depending on your damage. Like I said, it depends a lot on the groups. But the route I normally do would always have Lust and always have Prideful spawning here, which is, if you're not aware, it's a 30% damage increase or something like that. So if you time it right with all your CDs, this should die very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Now that knockback that just occurred is actually a magic. We have a disease on us, so if you pop AMS before that happens, you will prevent the disease from applying to you, which will save the healer a lot of effort. Yeah, typically we just have this mob rooted or something like that from one of the other characters in the group, and then we could also throw our slow D&D on the mobs, or even chains of ice them if we had to, or something like that. But it doesn't look like anybody's doing anything for that mob specifically. Usually you see like druids, it's like druid, hunter, rogue. The best one is warlock. If warlock uses banish on it, it will actually just completely stop it for 30 seconds. Like, it can't even be broken. But a lot of times druid's really popular right now, or hunter's really popular, so they'll just handle it.
So the zone blocks that, or the shell? The debuff.
Yeah, AMS, yeah, anti-magic shell, sorry. The 1 minute personal absorb.
Yeah.
It prevents any magic dots from going on the player, so if you time it right, then it makes nothing happen to you there. Perfect. But maybe a trick, though you probably won't interact with it either as melee or tank, but the farther you are away from that boss, the harder the fight is. You just saw that happen in that warlock, actually. He was so far away that when he rezzed, he got hit by the breath thing, the frontal thing again, because there's no way he's going to be able to get out of it. It's just like a huge splayed out line at that point.
Gotcha.
Now down here, there's a couple little tricks that I would definitely familiarize yourself with. These canisters, this yellow thing that we're going to kill very quickly. When it explodes, when it dies, it does this violent detonation. 3 seconds later, it's going to explode, and it's going to put this really heavy dot on anything it hits, including trash. So you want to try to make sure that you have the mobs in that when it happens. It's going to make like your damage go up theoretically huge. So of course, don't bolster the big guy like I just did. That wasn't great timing on the pull, but he does a frontal. This is actually a relatively dangerous mob. In the route I normally run, we only see this guy twice, but every time we fight him, it's dangerous. That frontal there, as we see, just hits that warlock for a ton of damage.
Yeah.
And then there's the dodge on that. It's just like a gray circle you can run out of. And then when it dies, it does a mechanic that is kind of the tank's job to run around and grab these things he spawns. If you do not step on them before 10 seconds pass, they'll spawn a proper mob, and you don't want that, obviously. So.
I didn't know you step on them.
Yeah, you just run right over them, yeah. And now again here, another trick, these plague boars, the rigged plague boars, when they explode, or I think it's actually when they get to 50%, they're also going to explode and hit everything in sight, including players and enemies. So we'll see that happen shortly, but and you can use this to like tremendous effect. Like if you watch really, really serious groups run, they'll basically like plan their entire route around those things exploding, so they have like basically free damage every pack. They either use a canister like here or a plague boar, and they'll kill like probably 50% of the count in the dungeon. Probably not advisable in your average pug, but it is, you know, where you can make use out of it, you want to definitely think about it. Now I typically go back around the left here with my standard route, just because getting the Pridefuls is like always on my mind, and there's no easy way to do it. If we kept going right there, it does seem a little awkward for your average key above or below a 10, but I find it's good habit. Like, find the route you want to run and keep running it no matter what the key level is.
Okay.
But nothing special on that mob, just does a frontal. If you're in front of it, you'll get knocked back, and the main thing on that mob is it actually puts this pretty big disease on you. If you take a look at it on me right now, it's a 20% health reduction, 2 stacks, so 10% per stack, and it's a disease. So if you don't have a paladin or priest, I think monk too maybe, then you're gonna have yeah, very little health after you fight that thing, basically. And it's the same thing with these rotting slime claws. These are actually like probably one of the most dangerous mobs to fight in the dungeon, just because they put this corroded claw stat debuff as well on me. So this can stack up to 9 times, I believe I've seen it. And it's again a disease, so if there's nobody to dispel it, like in this group we don't have anybody, it's just going to keep stacking, and I'll just eventually have very little health, so anything else will kill me. These mobs also run away when they're dying, which is a pain, but they are undead, so you could mind control them using control undead if you really needed to for some reason.
Okay.
Yeah, we clear out those. Now we go through the middle here. There's a couple ways that I've done it in the past. It's like you can try to go around the right or left, but as you see, they've actually added tentacles to kind of dissuade against that. And again, we have these rigged plague borers that I was talking about before, and when they go low health, they're going to explode or actually these ones just explode like that. So, and you see it hits that tentacle and does insane damage to that thing. So it's basically just sit there, wait for the plague borer to explode, and move on. As long as you don't get hit, it's perfect. Like, this mob is gonna
so
die.
It actually does damage to this.
Yep. Yeah.
The thing too.
Yeah. Anything that it hits, including players or enemies. So you could, like I said, literally use this thing to kill every trash in the dungeon. Honestly, every mob in the dungeon, including bosses, I've seen people do. So hopefully, Hook can res you. But yeah, so it's actually pretty rough there because you get slowed when you're fighting these things. So it's like you have to have an escape plan. Like I just died because somebody spawned a tentacle. Okay, no big deal. Anyway,
the tentacle picked me up and then.
Yeah, somebody aggroed it, I think. Ideally, we would skip that, but it's fine. We can keep moving for now. But yeah, so
res the tank.
I'll get it. Don't worry about it. Let's just kill this, and then we'll be out of combat. Somebody else got him, I guess. Anyway, so the thing here is it's like a small gauntlet. It's not really like too stressful, but you do have to keep it in mind. Like if somebody aggroes one of those tentacles, it's going to be a huge issue. And of course, if somebody gets hit by one of these mechanics and dies, then it's going to slow down. You're going to end up fighting more of those mobs. So just like your standard gauntlet, obviously you want to pass through it as quick as possible. But and I said this is actually a really good thing what just happened here. We have these two spawn right at the end of killing that, and if we quickly get another pack, we can get them back in time to kill them with those mobs. And it probably won't happen
gotcha.
just because I was a little slow. Yeah, not going to happen. But if we timed it right, we can get them to explode on this pack, and then it would effectively just kill the pack for us, which would be really like time efficient. But these mobs just have a fair amount of cast. These plague binders, they do a cast that if it gets off on you, it's going to root you. Not this cast, but I think it's called Gripping Infection. And this is a nice little trick here as DK. There's going to be two casters here. So I always try to grip whichever one takes the longest and then interrupt the other one because you want to try to get them in as fast as possible. But I marked this purple slime, congealed slime, with the skull because it actually makes the other ones take reduced damage. So even though it's not doing anything dangerous, it needs to die first. Otherwise, the other ones will just take forever to die.
Gotcha.
And the pestilence.
What is that called again?
The purple mob.
Congealed.
Yeah, that's it. Congealed. Yeah. And the pestilence slime is the red one. That one does a cast that really you should interrupt every time because it makes it does damage to anybody, not just the tank. So it'll hit the group and they'll be getting carved up pretty hard. And a little tip here: always come around the right side here. If you run through the center, the boss has a chance of jumping. He jumps from like all four of these platforms. You'll see him across the way there. If he does jump when you're in the middle there, he's going to aggro. So what we want to do is we want to come around to the side here and clear out this trash first, because if we don't do that, then the trash is going to aggro on the boss. And the only safe way to do that, at least the most reliable, is to just come around the back of those mushrooms. He won't aggro even if we're on the same quadrant as him. As long as we're behind this mushroom stalk, he will not see us. This is just the same mob that we fought earlier, this big guy, and we just want to quickly smash these things. This actually happens a lot where people don't do this, like especially as the tank, you might not want to because you want to get the boss. Like that was actually a great example. He was here, we could have aggroed him, but I wanted to make sure I hit those slimes first, so we kind of missed the opportunity there, and if you don't do that, you're going to be in trouble. Here's the second boss. Pretty straightforward encounter for the tank and DPS, really. This first phase is actually kind of a bait. A lot of people try to use their CDs here, but he only, every 30% or something like that, he leaves. And typically if everybody uses their CDs here, then you're just wasting like a good 10 seconds of him, because as soon as he gets to 66, he's going to jump. And then once he jumps the first time, his mechanics begin properly. So now he's going to jump. You have to just guess which platform he's going to jump to or just react. He's going to spawn two slimes again, the ones we were just fighting on the trash. the Plague Bomb there, slime needs to be killed as fast as possible, but the trick here is he also summons one of these purple slimes I was telling you about, and the purple slime will make everything near it take way less damage. So you as the tank have to be kind of keeping that slime away. But the boss, if he's not in range of somebody, he's going to cast a very deadly thing. So there's a couple things you could do. You could either try to like isolate the purple slime from the boss and then have somebody root it or just stop it in general, or you just tank both of them together and kill the purple slime as fast as possible, which is probably the most expedient option in these lower coordination groups. And this is going to happen twice. He's going to jump 3 times, or he's going to be on 3 platforms total, so 2 sets of slimes to kill. And again, the higher you go, the more important it will be to make sure that this purple slime is dying. A lot of people in the lower queues, they probably don't learn this. They don't think it matters, but it makes the boss take way less damage. And obviously it's going to slow down the fight substantially if you're not killing it. But if that one that's got the ticking time bomb thing goes off, it's going to do probably about 90% of the group's health. And most likely cause a wipe. There's also one other mechanic that just happened there that I should tell you about. Slime injection. It's kind of like the tank mechanic on the fight, and it does a really long disease, or it's like a magic dot on you. And again, another one that if you are the tank and you AMS before the cast ends, you will not get the dot, and again save the healer some effort. But as a DPS, you'll never get that mechanic.
So you emerge victorious.
Gotcha.
But at what cost? What vile
So kill explosion, slime first, then the purple, then boss.
Yep. Yeah, always that one with that ticking time bomb effect should be the first one to die, and then you should probably focus on killing the purple one just because it's going to make the boss go much slower until it's dead, and I feel like a lot of people aren't actually ready for that. One tip on these tentacles that we fought a few times, every time they do this crushing embrace, right now it's doing it on an NPC, but typically it will pick up a player and do it if it lives long enough. It can be stunned. Like if you stun the cast like this, you see it picked you up, I stunned it, you got immediately taken out and you weren't gripped up. Otherwise it's gonna kind of just grip you for quite a long period of time. Now here I've been going in the center. This is a little bit of maybe a questionable decision. I feel like it's a big part of the route that I normally run, and this is typically because right after what we just did there, we would have the prideful mob, which would make this really easy to kill. But this is probably the hardest actual trash in the dungeon if you're going to pull this without prideful, especially on a fortified week, because it's got a lot of mechanics. There's these defenders here, which is that bulwark of Maldraxxus makes mobs take very little damage. So as a DK, luckily you can just grip it to interrupt it. But otherwise, yeah, I would definitely, if you're going to pull that pack, if you're going to do my route, make sure you have some CDs up there because it's going to be really dangerous. And then I kind of just thread the needle here. We'll pick these mobs up. We need count anyway. It's always a little bit sketchy, especially if the group isn't aware. There's a couple tentacles and other mobs on the sides that we ran through there that could easily have aggroed. So just check, kind of do a 180 as you run through and make sure nobody has aggroed anything. And then we're good. Now typically I grab this guy with death grip. This is actually a really important part of this. If you don't death grip him, he's just going to stay up there. And then I'll quickly toss my D&D down there to grab this ambusher who's now going to jump towards us. So we've basically just gotten 2 mobs who are not really anywhere near each other and combine them with both death grip and a ranged attack. So, but these mobs, this is maybe the most important mob in here, Stealthling. So just cast that ability and it's going to spawn a bunch of these things over here. You see where I put my D&D? These things are going to do probably a 5-second cast, and if they get it off, they're going to one-shot somebody effectively. So what you want to do is you want to disrupt that cast or just straight up kill the mobs. And they're in stealth, so you have to pay attention to that. You have to see where they spawn. You have to have there's a couple ways to respond to it. As Blood DK, you can just Gore Fiends them. If you run over and Gore Fiends them, it'll interrupt all their casts, and that just takes them out of the encounter for a bit. But other group, mates like Shaman and Druid, they'll have stuns and knockbacks and different ways to disrupt them. You can also just disrupt the mob themselves, and that's that Brood Ambusher, that spider mob we just killed. You could stun it, grip it, knock it back, anything like that to stop it from casting the actual spell that spawns those mobs. So a little bit of trickery there, but if you get used to it, it'll be second nature after a while. And past that, just a couple other small mechanics on these packs. Again, the shield, which I see you gripped and you've already learned, but there's also a casted thing that's going to summon a spider. We want to make sure we don't get that, because then there's just an extra mob that we fight that just doesn't actually give us any count, so wasted time. Typically we'd be getting 80% here for when Prideful's in play, but again, because we pulled that extra pack, it won't work out. And this key specifically, this boss is the one, we were talking about before the key, and it's a pretty dangerous boss. As the tank, I would say you really don't want to interact too much with these spiders, these webs on the ground, because it's really difficult as a DK to remain healthy and running around, not in range of the mob all the time. So hopefully your group mates will handle it. And that mechanic there, yeah, just run out. And I think even if you AMS, it might prevent the stun. I'm not sure. I've never gotten the mechanic myself, but so like these two are right next to us, so we can easily just kind of throw D&D down and then plant for these two. And then we're assuming that everybody else is going to get the rest. And if they do, then that's great. But if they don't, you might have to run out there and try to make a play. DK is probably the worst tank forward, period, though, just because the only spells we have that can be used are going to be AMS, or I'm sorry, of course, Death and Decay. And you really don't want to be wasting that on nothing if you don't need to. But ideally Hunter and Druid and Mage actually are all really good, and they're all really in the meta right now, so those classes can get him out with very little effort compared to what we can do as both Unholy and Blood.
Alright, so as DPS, you're supposed to go get those and bring them to you?
Yeah, effectively. Any mechanic that will, like, any ability that will do damage without a target, we'll get them. So, yeah, like, not a lot of options, unfortunately, as DK, like I was saying, But anything that would do that would be fine. So AMS, or I keep saying that by accident, but I mean Death and Decay, Gorfiend's Grasp would get them out just because it's near. If you're near them, it would work. Sorry, I'm kind of panicking here because this is a really tough fight with Necrotic. If you don't drop stacks in the middle of these phases of these ads, you're just gonna die here for sure. It's like one dungeon that I would not even want to do on Necrotic Week because it's just very unfair, this boss.
Yeah, how do you drop stacks if there's all those assassins and the boss is...
Yeah, it's almost impossible. You have to time Dancing Rune Weapon well, or have like Trents or Rock Ellie to help, or just get lucky and parry and dodge and stuff. Now typically we'd come down here. There's a couple options, like you could mind control a mob if you're... Oh, what did I just TC? Okay, I just disconnected. But anyway, yeah, there's a couple options. You could mind control. These mobs actually hit really, really, really hard, but they're really slow. So it's not a bad idea to mind control one and use it for the boss if you're Blood DK. Obviously, as Unholy, you wouldn't do that, but it's just something to keep in mind. The thing about this area, though, is the count is a little finicky. If you don't, if you do my exact route, you're not going to have count before the final boss unless you go out of your way for it. And I actually do that on purpose with Prideful, because skipping the last Prideful is often, I feel like it's a good investment of your time, because it doesn't give you any count and all it does is buff you on a boss that you don't need a buff on. But when you're doing this sub 10, it's probably not, I don't think it would be a good idea. People would probably think that you don't know what you're doing. It's just maybe a bad look on a key without Prideful. So instead, there's a couple mobs that I'll show you at the end. Although actually, I'm not sure we'll even have to get them because of the extra pack we pulled. I will show you regardless. There's a couple mobs as we jump down, 3 slimes that you can kill, and they would give a pretty easy count. They give 1% each. So if you find yourself with 3% or less after you've done all of this route, then you would have those 3 to get, and that would be it. You could, and again, you could either get them at the end of the dungeon or right before the final boss to get Prideful when you're in that range. But otherwise, these guys, these devoted, these are actually present on the boss too, and they are really, really, really hard-hitting mobs, but they move extremely slowly. But then this mini boss that we're fighting is going to empower one of them so they don't move slowly anymore. So typically you just isolate this one out and then let these other 3 just hang back and get AoE down by the rest of the group. You really don't ever want to get meleeed by these unless you're 100% sure you're going to be able to survive it, because they do a lot of damage. And here's the last boss. So it's really, you should look at this as a 3-phase fight. The beginning is the easiest part because everybody's always going to have CDs up for it, and there's going to be the same mechanics in every phase, but The longer you're in the phase, the worse it gets. So the first thing you want to do is always move to this malignant spawn. Somebody has to soak an ability that it's going to do. It's not going to get off now because we killed it, but it also signifies where the first safe spot is for this mechanic. And then there's going to be this infectious rain. Good. Oh, I thought you were going to ask a question.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
Oh, cool. But anyway, yeah, then there's going to be that infectious rain, and yeah, so anyway, so we're just dodging these tentacles. They actually nerfed it recently to make it a little bit easier to dodge, I guess. I'm not exactly sure what they changed, but one tip I will give you on that is there's like a minimum range on it, I guess is the way to put it. Like if you're just too close to the center, regardless of where you're positioned around the circle, it will hit you. So even if it looks like you're perfectly safe, if you're just right on the edge of this slime puddle in the middle, you will still get hit, even if you're nowhere near the tentacles. So that's just something to keep in mind, especially as a tank's perspective. But otherwise, infectious rain, another disease. So yet another reason to bring a priest or paladin, and another thing that we could use anti-magic shell on to prevent the application of really, this is actually a great dungeon.
He does it after this ad, you said?
Yeah, it alternates. Like she'll spawn this malignant spawn and then do the infectious rain, and the longer you're in the phase, the worse it gets, basically. The more happens. It's like really, really, really hard to heal through, honestly. You'll see a lot of wipes in this key just to this last boss if the healer is not somebody who could dispel those diseases. And then the tough part as a tank is making sure you know exactly where to go to dodge, and also getting threat on those ads, because even though they're dangerous for us, if they hit a DPS, they will definitely die. They just nerfed those mobs to have like a lot less health or something. It was like 50% less health or something like that. But yeah, there you go. Great AMZ. It's good instincts already on that. It's a lot of damage. And then this last phase is just, you want to burn it because all the mechanics are happening at once instead of just half and half like normally. And this warlock is not good. Alright, cool. So we do actually have count, but if you would come and I'll show you where those mobs are real quick. Just so you see what I mean. So typically I would get there and need 3 more raises. It's usually about like 2.5% actually. And we would just come through back here. So you go back, this is like where we jump down from above this pool here, and then to the left there's actually 3 slimes, the same mobs that we fought elsewhere in the dungeon, the rot marrow, congealed, and the pestilence slime. So typically you only need, well, yeah, I think I need all 3 of these typically, but regardless, it's 1% even for each of those. So and that would be the end of the dungeon.
That's interesting. Why did we get it this time? Oh, because we didn't have Prideful.
Yeah.
You said, right?
Yeah, well, we
counts
didn't
as
need it.
percent.
We didn't need it in this because very early in the dungeon, somebody aggroed an extra pack that I didn't plan on pulling, and we never accounted for it because I didn't feel like going out of the way.
Gotcha.
But yeah, typically you would be at, I think it's like 97.5%, and you would just get those 3, and that would be it. And again, you can get those before this boss too if you'd rather have Prideful for this boss, but